Okay, today I wanted to talk about manga I've been reading lately. It is Rave Master by Hero. I don't actually remember the guy's name. Let me see if I can find it. Hero M something. That's what it is. Basically, it's the same guy who did Fairy Tale. Yeah, so I've been reading it, and it's enjoyable. It definitely has got some flaws and issues, but then that's kind of what I wanted to talk about was starting off, kind of trying to figure out and understand. Rave Master is popular. It definitely did very well for itself. I have my criticisms of it, but you can't really deny success. However, at the same time, there was a question as to the big three. Why didn't it become more popular, or why is there no big four, basically? So you got One Piece, Naruto. So basically, all of these make the big three. So the question, of course, is why no big four? Why did this not become well known? It started right around the same time. I think it was like 2001, so it was in a good position. One Piece, Naruto, or One Piece is 99, Naruto is like 2000, 2001. Same with Bleach. They kind of all started at the same time. And of course, when I was reading a ton and coming up, getting familiar with anime and manga and everything, it was the big three, and this is what everything. So the question is, why is there not a big four? Kind of what is a problem that kind of separated this from the others? That's what I kind of wanted to talk about. Specifically for this one, we're just going to talk about the fights, and there is a aspect in the previous video I did, which anatomy of a fight, where so we kind of the way I visualize this is kind of go from here. So here we've got. You can look at this in terms of a arc, scene, or arc, or a fight, or just a dialogue or something. But we're just going to talk about this in the context of a fight, and kind of talk about what basically sets this apart and kind of sets it up, more or less. And one aspect that I really talked about on the previous video that it was very, very, very important to make sure you get is the idea of progress, and the idea that the hero earns the fight. Basically, you want to earn the victory. Usually this is by starting off from a weak position and working your way to a strong position. This is why Jackie Chan always starts off from behind. It's the reason why a lot of the villains, the hero goes in outnumbered. The main villain is he outnumbered, or sand in the eyes. The villain throws sand in the eyes in Gladiator. He stabs him in the back, basically. Stabs him in the back. There's all this different stuff where basically it comes into play, and it's kind of setting up for the hero to be the underdog, kind of the eternal underdog. It's like no matter how much success you set them up to be the underdog in each fight, in each encounter, so that way they're able to kind of overcome this setback, this uphill fight, basically. And that's kind of how visually this is kind of how I log it and think about it. And this is something where in Rave Master that they sometimes do okay. They do okay. I think honestly the biggest problem with it is that it doesn't feel like they earn the fight, because one, they go into a fight with there's no plan, basically, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I'm going to talk about each of these and then kind of compare them mainly to how the fights in One Piece and then the fights in Naruto, because there's different ways you can overcome these issues or these shortcomings, basically, for each of your stories. So they go into a battle with no plan. This is how you have our main character. We're just going to call him what is it? Haru. Yeah. Haru is going up against an antagonist. So P for protagonist, A for antagonist. We're going to go talk about the Lance fight, basically. So basically, we got these two guys who are gonna versus each other. And basically, this guy is supposed to be very powerful. You know, we're basically set it up for super powerful. He's ruled this city, and, you know, he's one of demon cards, main guys. He's a great swordsman, all of this. Haru's gotten the rave, gotten the sword, and he does pretty well, but there's no training arcs. He hasn't done any, let's see, no training arcs. There's no real, it's kind of just one encounter. So he's basically goes up there, fights the guy, wins, and makes it to the end. That's kind of been how the fights have been so far. So the previous fights have basically kind of just make it. Basically, they force through it, and they make it to the end. I kind of need a name for those, but we're just going to call it make it to the end. Ones where you go in there with not really a plan and you're just going to make it up as you go along. Again, this is not necessarily a bad thing, and it doesn't mean that these are not insurmountable. It just means that I don't think that Rave does a good job of setting up this idea for earning the fight, basically. Because what we generally see in this is basically you have the main character, you know, they're going to fight against him against Lance. You know, they're going to fight each other. Basically, they fight. Lance gets the upper hand because he's so much stronger. And this is what we're doing. You're setting this up. You make it so Lance is so much stronger to, you know, set the stakes, basically. Set the stakes, and you're setting it up for, you know, a big bad villain, basically. Because you need to make sure that this in line into something I've kind of shown in the previous videos where it's, you know, to this, and this is your villain one. But then for villain 2, you've got to go over here. And then, you know, you've got to keep going. Basically, what I'm describing here are the different fights. And this goes up in the scale. You have to continually scale upwards, or else your fight is falling, in a sense, falling backwards. You know, after you fight Frieza, you don't want to continue. Goku can't continually fight low-level people and nobody people in random tournaments. You have to continually go up, or else what you're going to do is it's going to be boring, and that'll kill your story immediately. So what we have to do is basically we've beaten these two bad guys here, and so what we're going up against is the Lance fight. And so what we do is we've got to set him up to be stronger than all the others. You know, he beat the other guys handedly, and you can get a sense for how strong Haru is, but we've encountered Lance now, so we've got to continually move upward and set Lance to be even bigger, badder than the others. So we've got to set this up. Big bad evil villain status. We've got to establish, move stuff out of the way. He's set up as so much stronger. So you go up in the fight, and you kind of do this by using other characters. So you have another character. Basically, you can do, audiences could do the math basically. So Haru has the same strength as, we'll call it Musica, let's say. Let's say they have the same strength. And then Musica loses to Lance. I don't think they ever actually encounter each other, but let's just say that's the case. And then Haru faces Lance. And based on this, the audience knows what's going to happen. Lance is stronger than Haru. Basically, that's one way how you can do it. You can introduce and set this up. Another way you can do this is by setting it up in the fight. So once the fight starts, then you can have basically Lance get the other upper hand and do the typical villain. Let's see. Oh, I thought this would be a challenge. You know, one of those typical cocky things that villains say when they've got the other upper hand. So that's kind of the beginning point of the fight. And then usually there's this continual back and forth where basically it's the main character against Lance, and he has a moves and he overcomes it, but then Lance strikes back, and it continually reframes. So basically then you realize, oh, okay, then it's down here, and then you're continually fighting up against Lance, and you're fighting up. And by up, what I mean is you're fighting from a point of weakness to getting to a stronger point. You're fighting from a place of ignorance. You don't know your own strength. You don't know the enemy's strength. He's got a special move. And usually what one of these kind of looks like, if you're going to do it, is basically you have like a special move, and then you figure out how it works. Figure out how it works. And then once you figure out it works, he releases, special move. Let's see. Special move 2. And basically then there's a variation, he's changing it up on you. So then he can continually get the upper hand. And this is kind of how usually the fights will go. Like this, and then the main character will get the upper hand, something like this, and it'll be on even ground. So then they'll be on even ground. And then, the villain will go something like this. Let's see. This is my final form. I wasn't really trying. And then basically what you see then is in the main character then, goes way down, then it's super weak, and then he has to fight his way back up again. There's this kind of semblance of, oh great, we thought the main character was starting to get some semblance of getting the momentum. He's figuring out how to beat this guy, something like that, and then it all gets completely reset. And then what you have to happen here, and this is the key part, you have to answer the question is, why can the main character beat this person? And this is kind of the implicit question that you need to be able to answer, because if you're kind of trying to do this balancing act where you're trying to sell the villain as super strong. Super strong, while also at the same time, the MC, our main character, can still win. And this is what you're trying to figure out the balance. And this is always really tricky, because what you're trying to thread that needle as tight as possible, while still at the same time making it very believable that your main character can win. And that's the tricky part. That's what you have to figure out how to do. And this is what I think Rave Master doesn't do very well, because it's kind of one of those things where the main character just makes up as he goes along, which can work. And I'm going to talk about an anime, One Piece, that does that very well, where you have a character who does not plan. This is not a Shikamaru. Let's see. He's not thinking up these elaborate plans in order to beat the villain. There's not something. I just recently got kind of read through Dungeon Meshi, and I talked about that in an earlier video, and he talks about the how he overcomes the villain there is, the audience didn't see. I didn't see it coming. It was a really good surprise, but at the same time, it made sense in the lore. It made sense to the character, and it made sense in terms of his abilities right then and there. He didn't have to level up in order to do it. But there's no plan basically. But the way One Piece does it is it does it basically in these what I'm going to call is tiered fights. So what you have is Luffy goes in with some understanding of his power level. Let's say it's right here, and then you'll have another guy like here. So we're going to use Arlong for an example. So this is the power level basically. Power level. So obviously Luffy's not as strong as Arlong. So what we're going to do, and what we do is the story basically shows, and they have a fight, and then Luffy loses. But because the story goes on, he isn't killed, and then there's a break. There's a break, and this break could either be an actual separation, the Arlong leaves and they go off and do their own thing. It could be Luffy escapes and runs away, or Luffy gets defeated. You know, in Kaido, I think Luffy gets defeated and then locked up in jail for a while. There is the one with the lightning guy in Skypiea, where Luffy just gets knocked down. Some sort of break. It could also be that, you know, he's fighting the minions. You know, he fights the minions, basically. Let's see. Minions. There could be a time lapse. Could be any number of separation. And then, let's see, and then there's another fight. And then Luffy wins. But what this does is it basically kind of gives you a chance. You can build up the super big bad evil guy, but then build Luffy up, and then at the same time from there, what you're able to do is go forward and you're able to move forward and kind of provide a reasonable explanation for why Luffy is able to win. He's able to win because he lost. He lost, but he didn't die. You know, he was able to learn from his fight. He was able to go through this. He was able to train up, even though it's not necessarily like a training arc. He's able to go through it and train through this. And then he's able to re-encounter the guy. And then so that way, when he comes back to it, he's able to win. It's kind of this tiered fight. Basically, all fights are kind of, you know, this is the first fight. Then you've got the break. And then the second fight. And this is kind of how they operate. And this is kind of a one-piece style of fight. And this is how they do it without having a training arc, while at the same time proving this, you know, super strong guy. Like when Luffy first meets Arlong, he gets destroyed, but you have to explain why that's allowed to happen, because you have to then explain why Luffy is allowed to beat him, and it makes sense. You know, it has to work within the story. Naruto is one where they just do training arcs. Basically, they just do training arcs. So with Naruto, we've got a few different fights you can kind of look at, but basically the Zabuza one, those two ninjas show up, and Naruto can't do anything. And let's see, we'll just call this one. Can't really do much. So then there's training arc, and then Zabuza 2. And then for that, there's even, I think, more training, and then even a Zabuza 3 fight. But basically, there's this idea where you see this fight. What this fight does is it establishes the power level. You're very weak. You're all the way down here. And then in the next one, you're maybe up here. I don't know if you guys can see that. If you've got like different levels of 3, 2, 1. And over there are 3, and this is a 2, and it's a 1. I'm just applying arbitrary numerical measurements, but basically it's, you know, hey, instead of an insurmountable odds, maybe it's just, you know, it's somewhat insurmountable odds. You're basically kind of leveling the playing field, while also at the same time establishing that these villains are very, very strong, and it's a miracle that you'd be able to defeat them. However, now that you've trained, you've fought against them, you've learned them, you've come up with tactics and plans, you know, battle plans and tricks and moves, signature moves of your own that you can then come up with and then fight against the enemy from there. And that's a really good way to kind of see that through. And this is kind of how the two different ones take that on. And this is kind of the problem that I see with Rave Master, is that more or less it's kind of just a keep on trying, basically. And then eventually we win. And that's it. There's no plan, no training arc, no real semblance. And the reason why people like training arcs is because then the training feels earned. If your character is going to get stronger, you want to feel that it's because of hard work, not just because. Because then it's, you know, it's the... You don't want just Daddy Warbucks came by and gave you, you know, a power-up or the next level. It's something. It needs to feel earned in order for it to matter, basically. It must be earned. And that is where I think this one particularly doesn't really do a very good job of. I think it could use some training arcs, even something simple like with Hunter x Hunter, where it does with the whole Nin aspect, where they encounter a guy and he's like, listen, you guys are strong and you're too good. Hisoka, I think, goes through a training arc with them. They learn how to use Nin in Hunter x Hunter, and it's pretty good. It's pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. And it's interesting to see that develop, and it kind of explains why they're able to eventually kind of get up and master and fight against some people, as opposed to being, you know, the prodigy who just suddenly is able to do something good. But yeah, so I think that kind of covers everything I covered. So I hope you guys, zoom out here, I think that kind of covered everything. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one.